Welcome. I am so glad that so many of you could join us today and be part of the 2025 UCSF School of Dentistry Global Oral Health Symposium. My name is Ben Chaffee. I'm the director of the school's program in Global Oral Health and professor of oral epidemiology and dental public health at the School of Dentistry at UCSF. We've been holding the symposium for a long time, since 2011. This was part of the vision of Professor and Associate Dean John Greenspan. John really wanted to bring together oral health leaders and future leaders from all around the world to engage in ideas, to share in the latest research. And today, with the live online platform, the format's a little bit different, but it truly is a global event. We have our speakers joining us from all over the world. And it is a fantastic program today. If you look to the chat feature, in a moment, you'll see a link to this year's program. You can read biographies of our speakers and brief summaries of their talks. You might notice, too, that none of our featured talks come from an expert with a background in dentistry. That's intentional. I expect that the relevance to oral health will be quite clear, but I really value what I think we're going to get from looking at today's topic from a broader context, thinking about health and health policy in a more general sense than just this narrow focus on teeth and the mouth. And this year's theme, of course, is food, food systems, and oral health. And so at the risk of falling into platitudes, food is central to our lives. It's not just a necessity for energy for life, as it is, but it goes beyond that. It is an expression of our shared cultures. It's a point of connection between family and friends. Eating can bring us great satisfaction and joy. As a parent of a very stubborn 4-year-old, it can bring us frustration. And we spend a tremendous amount of time and money obtaining and preparing food. And the industries that are dedicated to providing that food and bringing it to our plate, in some cases, are gigantic in size and in influence, socially and politically. So our speakers today will address this topic from different perspectives. And I hope they'll send everybody home with some new insights. I invite everyone here who's taking part to share in the conversation by submitting your questions, comments, using the Q&A function. We have time to look at those questions after each talk, and we'll also have a longer moderated conversation at the end. And I'm very happy and grateful that those conversations will be moderated by Dr. Kristen Kearns, Associate Professor of Oral Epidemiology and Dental Public Health here at UCSF, and a member of the Lancet Commission on Global Oral Health. Dr. Kearns herself is a globally recognized expert on the commercial determinants of health, particularly the sugar industry and its efforts to influence regulations and public perceptions. Finally, at the end of our 3 talks, you'll have the opportunity, if you wish, to redeem 2 units of continuing dental education. We'll provide a link in the chat, and those units are available at no charge to you. And so right now, technology willing, we have a short recorded message from the Dean of the UCSF School of Dentistry, Dr. Michael Reddy.
Greetings. Welcome to our school's 14th annual Global Oral Health Symposium. I'm Mike Reddy, Dean of UCSF School of Dentistry. Thank you all for joining us, and a special thank you to our speakers who are joining from different time zones. Dr. Rauber is joining from Sao Paulo, Brazil, where it's 4 hours later than it is here on the west coast of the US. And Dr. Mackenbach is in the Netherlands, where it's 9 hours later. So she's staying up late to join us today. Thank you. And Dr. Schmidt, who's right here at UCSF. You know, it's the speakers that make this event so special. This symposium has a record of drawing world-renowned speakers and supporting vital research projects in public health, epidemiology, and basic sciences in the realm of global oral health. Research is central to our mission and a big part of why the work we do at UCSF has worldwide impact. This year's theme is food, food systems, and oral health. This is a fascinating and important topic, and I'm glad that it's receiving the focus it deserves. We are fortunate to have experts in this area joining us as speakers today. It got me thinking about highly processed, super tasty foods and my own eating habits, and also innovating ways to prevent chronic disease by changing food systems. So to all our speakers, thank you for being here today. I also want to thank Ben Chaffee for leading our global oral health initiatives at UCSF and for organizing this symposium. Dr. Chaffee has once again gathered leaders from all corners of the world to share the work and inspire us. Let today's speakers inspire, energize, and propel your own efforts toward achieving positive changes in global oral health. Your work has never been more important. Again, thank you, Ben, and thank you all for attending.
Well, thank you, Dean Reddy. So to keep this online symposium aligned with online attention spans, we'll quickly move into our speakers. And as distinguished as they are, as grateful as we are for their expertise, we'll forego the lengthy formal introductions. Slight change of plans. We're going to switch up the sequence today. And first, we'll hear from Dr. Fernanda Rauber, a nutritionist and epidemiologist at the University of Sao Paulo. And I will add this too, that Fernanda and I go way back. We met when we were both graduate students some years ago. In fact, in Brazil, you would call us postgraduate students at that time, doing training at that point at the Federal University of Health Sciences in Porto Alegre. And it was really, I'll say, a formative time in my career, really learning how to do research and collect data and be out on the ground. And Fernanda was a part of that. So really, really happy to see her back and pleased to turn over the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin. Let me share my screen. Can you see the full screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes? Okay. Hello, everyone. As you already heard, I'm Fernanda Rauber. I am a member of NUPENS, the group that developed the classification system which introduced the concept of ultra-processed foods. First of all, I want to thank you for the invitation. I am very happy to be part of this event and share some ideas developed by our research group NUPENS. As you may know, English is not my first language, so I hope you don't mind if I take things slowly. Thank you for your understanding. Today, I will be talking a bit about the background, key concepts, and scientific evidence on ultra-processed foods and their impact on health. So I will start with this graphic, which tells us a bit about the background on the concept of ultra-processed foods. The graphic shows the temporal variation in food purchases of Brazilian families between 1987 and 2009. Below the horizontal line, you can see the foods whose consumption has decreased, and above the line, foods whose consumption increased in the period. We can note, for example, the decrease in the consumption of rice, beans, flour, eggs, milk, meat, and also oil and sugar, while the participation of sweets, crackers, cakes, sausages, ready-to-eat dishes, and sugary drinks increased. What we can conclude by looking at this graph? Well, the first things that caught our attention was the large decline in oil and sugar, which are culinary ingredients. At the time, recommendations were to avoid this type of food, since it was poor in nutrients and very high in calories, and was associated with the development of obesity and chronic diseases. At first glance, this seemed like a contradiction or even a paradox. The same data, however, gave us a clue to begin to understand that looking at changes in food consumption from the perspective of nutritional content only, a perspective that was essential in the era of nutritional deficiencies, would no longer be enough to understand the phenomenon of the obesity epidemic. Then, observing the use, nature, and purpose of these foods, we were able to understand that, in fact, a radical change was taking place in the dietary patterns of the Brazilian population, not precisely characterized by a change in the consumption of traditional foods, consumed in the form of culinary preparation, which therefore require the use of oils and sugar, and an increase in ready-to-eat industrialized products. So researchers from NUPENS proposed a new hypothesis that the key factor linking food consumption and health is not the nutrient, not even the food itself, but rather what is done to the food before it is acquired and consumed, that is, its processing. This idea was first published in 2009 by Professor Carlos Monteiro, and the most recent version of the NOVA classification system was published in 2019. Because today the majority of all foods are processed in some way, it doesn't make sense to separate foods into two categories, processed and unprocessed foods. So NOVA classifies foods based on the degree and purpose of the processing. This means that it is necessary to separate the processes that are harmless, beneficial, or even essential, and that are used for centuries, from those processes that are harmful for the human health and the planet. In the first three groups of NOVA system, the process have mainly three functions: to increase the duration of food, which also reduce the food loss, optimize or shorten the food preparation time, and to modify or diversify sensory characteristics. This process transforms unprocessed foods, which are here at the beginning of the system, into minimally processed foods, which are foods that do not receive new substances into composition, such as white rice, into culinary ingredients, such as oil, which is an extraction of a food, and also into processed foods such as cheese, which receives a more sophisticated process that includes the addition of salt, for example. These foods are eaten alone or combined with unprocessed foods or with each other in culinary preparations. They are the basis of traditional meals eaten for centuries, with many cultural and regional variations. So group one, unprocessed or minimally processed foods. The process does not involve the addition of any substances. Examples include fruits, vegetables, grains, pasta, milk, plant yogurt, meat, fish, poultry. Group two, processed culinary ingredients. These foods are not consumed by themselves. You need group one food to consume them. Examples include butter, salt, sugar, and oils. And group three, processed foods. They are products manufactured industrially with the addition of culinary ingredients to unprocessed or minimally processed foods. And the intention here is to preserve foods and also to improve their sensory qualities. Examples include unpacked bread, cheese, preserves, and fruits in syrup. Radically different is what we now call ultra-processing, which is meant to create a completely different product. Ultra-processed foods, indeed, neither even should call it food. They are products. Ultra-processed foods are ready-to-eat industrial formulations made with several industrial processing steps and parts of food components, such as fats, sugars, starch, protein isolates, with little or no presence of the original matrix of that food, and often added of many cosmetic additives that make them more attractive. Examples of NOVA Group 4 include chicken and fish nuggets, instant noodles, soft drinks, chocolate, candies, margarine, most breakfast cereals, flavoring milk drinks, and chips. Ultra-processed food are manufactured and marketed to replace processed and unprocessed food and culinary preparations, and for huge profits, often using illustrations referencing the original foods. This is the case of the juice with the illustration of the orange. They are extremely convenient and are produced from a mix of relatively inexpensive commodities. There are plenty of examples, and the latest trend topic is the plant-based burger, told as healthy but ultra-processed. Ultra-processed food are highly advertised. In this chocolate here, you see a very clear message: eat without stopping. In this, we can see Ronaldo, one of the most famous Brazilian soccer players, associated with an image that he needs to eat chocolate to be calm. And here in the later, the traditional children's cartoons associated with ultra-processed ones. Ultra-processed foods generate lots of profit for companies and definitely not meant to feed people. Here you can see data from 2013, which showed that practically all products, ultra-processed products, were manufactured by just 10 transnational food corporations. Take a moment to look at the brands. They are everywhere. You will probably recognize most of them. So why we need actions to curb the consumption of ultra-processed foods? Today, more than 10 years after the first paper that introduced all this idea, several reviews of the literature carried out by different research groups have already been published, showing the negative impact of high consumption of these foods on health. A recent umbrella review of epidemiological meta-analysis identified 45 unique pooled analyses assessing the association between ultra-processed food consumption and adverse health outcomes. High consumption of these foods was associated with a risk of several conditions, such as cardiometabolic diseases, common mental disorders, and mortality outcomes. Complementary evidence comes from a randomized clinical trial. In this randomized crossover clinical trial, 20 adults were randomized to receive for 2 weeks either a diet with only non-ultra-processed foods or a diet with more than 80% ultra-processed foods. These diets were combined, matched for energy content and many nutrients. Their results show it, see the first graph, that when exposed to ultra-processed diets, see the blue line, participants consumed on average 508 more calories per day than when exposed to diets without ultra-processed foods, see the red line. And that after 2 weeks, please see the second graph, the participants increased 0.9 kilograms of weight consuming the ultra-processed diet and lost 0.9 kilograms of weight consuming the non-ultra-processed diet. In this study, we aimed to investigate whether the degree of food processing modifies the association between plant-sourced foods and cardiovascular disease outcomes. All food items consumed by participants were categorized by source, plant or animal, and by processing level using the novel classification. We found that a higher dietary contribution of plant sources non-ultra-processed foods was associated with a 20% lower risk of cardiovascular disease and a 49% lower risk of cardiovascular disease mortality. See the red dot. In contrast, a higher intake of plant sources ultra-processed foods was associated with a 16% increase in cardiovascular disease risk and a 39% increase risk of mortality. Importantly, when considering all plant sources foods together, regardless of processing, we found no association with cardiovascular disease outcomes. When we look at, especially at coronary heart disease in blue, the patterns of results was similar, though with stronger effect sizes. These findings highlight that the degree of food processing matters even within plant-based diets. In this study, we used data from national surveys and mortality records in 8 countries to assess the impact of ultra-processed foods on all-cause mortality. First, we analyzed data from more than 200,000 people from cohort studies in national surveys. We found a linear association. For every 10% increase in the ultra-processed food consumption, the risk of all-cause mortality increased by about 3%. Then, we applied this relative risk to the dietary data from each country. We found that in countries with lower ultra-processed food intake, such as Colombia and Brazil, between 15% and 17% of total energy, around 4% of premature death were attributable to ultra-processed food consumption. In contrast, in the US and the UK, where more than 50% of total energy comes from ultra-processed foods, around 40% of premature death were related to these foods. In 2018, for example, we estimated that 124,000 premature deaths in the US were caused by ultra-processed food consumption. So, even though we don't fully understand all these mechanisms, many aspects of how these foods are made help explain why they increase the risk of diseases. The most evident mechanisms that explain the association between the consumption of ultra-processed food and the development of chronic diseases is the negative impact of these foods on diet quality because of their poor nutritional profile. Ultra-processed foods have higher energy density. That means more calories in a smaller amount of food, more free sugar and saturated and trans fats, and less dietary fiber, protein, vitamins and minerals, and bioactive compounds than non-ultra-processed foods. And that is a nutrient profile that favors chronic diseases. Studies carried out with data from 13 countries have already shown that its consumption is systematically associated with the deterioration of nutritional quality of the diet. In these graphics, it is seen that a higher consumption of ultra-processed foods was directly associated with a higher consumption of total unsaturated fats and free sugars, nutrients that increase the risk of chronic diseases, and inversely associated with the consumption of fiber and potassium, nutrients that may protect against disease risk. Beyond the poor nutrient profile, another key finding from this study is the displacement of healthy food groups, such as fruits, vegetables, and legumes. And these combinations create the perfect recipe for chronic diseases. But there are several other mechanisms beyond nutrient profile that help explain the link between ultra-processed food and chronic diseases. First, food processing changes the natural structure of food. This affects how fast we eat, how much we absorb, how our gut bacteria respond. These changes can reduce satiety, rise blood sugar levels, and cause problems in how the body uses energy. Second, processing can create harmful substances such as acrolein and trans fats, and these are linked to cell damage, inflammation, and a higher risk of metabolic diseases. Third, food additives like colors, sweeteners, and emulsifiers can harm gut bacteria and increase inflammation. Even though each one is tested, we still don't fully understand how they act together in the body. In addition, packing materials such as plastic and mineral oils can mix with food and expose people to harmful chemicals like bisphenols, which may affect hormones. Finally, ultra-processed food are more practical. You can eat them anywhere while you're doing other things like driving or watching TV. They are easy to find, often comes in large portions, and usually cost less. Combined with strong marketing, especially for children, these factors encourage people to eat more and build unhealthy habits. All these factors help explain why ultra-processed foods are linked not only to poor diet quality, but also to obesity and several other metabolic problems. Food addiction may also help explain the link between ultra-processed food consumption and disease, especially obesity. These products are designed to stimulate the brain's reward system. Their high levels of sugar, fat, salt, and cosmetic additives can lead to a loss of control over eating and promote compulsive consumption. There is also growing evidence that ultra-processed food industry harms the environment by producing unnecessary greenhouse gas emissions, using large amounts of cheap ingredients that lead to deforestation, replacing sustainable farming, and depending on resource-heavy processing and packing. And how is the consumption of ultra-processed food in the world? Evidences about the negative impacts of ultra-processed foods are more relevant if we consider that in the last decades, the consumption of ultra-processed foods has increased significantly and has accelerated in several countries, but with great intensity in the countries low and middle income. This figure shows the trends in annual sales per capita of ultra-processed foods from 2000 to 2013 in 8 regions of the world. In 2000, the highest sales volumes were recorded in North America, the US and Canada, and Australasia. However, sales more than doubled in parts of Asia, the Middle East, and North Africa. Data from dietary intake surveys show that the share of ultra-processed foods in the diet varies greatly across countries worldwide. In the Americas, for example, it ranges from 16% in Colombia to 58% in the US. In Europe, the variation is also wide, from 15% in Romania to 57% in the UK. There are different reasons for these differences. Economic and trade factors play a role. In rich countries, there is more availability of ultra-processed foods, but culture also matters. Countries with strong food traditions, like in the Southern Europe and parts of Asia, tend to eat fewer ultra-processed foods, even when they are high-income countries. Among children, we can see similar results. Looking at the orange fraction of the graph, representing the consumption of ultra-processed food, we see that the energy proportion of these foods is higher in rich countries, such as Australia, the US, and the UK on the right of the device, intermediate in Chile, Mexico, and Argentina, and lower in Brazil and Colombia on the left of the slide. This figure shows the percentage of energy from ultra-processed food in the US diet from 2001 to 2018. Intake was higher among children, rising from 61.5% to 67%, and among adults, it increased from 53.5% to 57%. So ultra-processed food are the main source of calories in the US, especially for children. This chart shows data from our most recent national surveys in Brazil. It can be seen that between 2009 and 2017, there was a 5.5 increase in the consumption of ultra-processed foods. However, we also observed differences between population subgroups. For example, even though the consumption of ultra-processed food is higher among white people in Brazil, it did not change over time. On the other hand, it increased significantly among people of Black, indigenous race, or color. Likewise, the consumption of ultra-processed food was still higher among the richest people in Brazil. However, the consumption increased significantly in the three lowest group of family income, the poorest group, and decreased significantly in the richest group of the population. These data indicate that in the coming years, perhaps, we may face a transition to a more uniform but higher consumption of these foods in Brazil. Coming to the end of the presentation, we can say that, based on that, public policies are needed to reduce the production, marketing, and consumption of ultra-processed foods, and to improve access to fresh and minimally processed foods. We need action on two main fronts: change the narrative. We must question the version promoted by the ultra-processed food industry and build a new one that supports public health. The second front includes all the policy actions and regulations. On the first front, Brazil is a successful case. The dietary guidelines for the Brazilian population, published in 2014, was one of the first in the world to consider the impacts of the food system on health and the environment for the elaboration of the recommendations. The Brazilian guide has a golden rule to always prefer fresh or minimally processed foods and culinary preparations to ultra-processed foods. Following Brazil, other countries have also included recommendations based on the level of processing in their most recent guides, such as Uruguay, Peru, Ecuador, Canada, France. When we talk about public policies, the challenges are big. Today, there is a clear agreement that we need actions from different sectors working together on many fronts. These actions include taxes on ultra-processed foods and financial support for healthy foods, marketing restrictions, especially for children, clear front of pack labels, and the promotion of healthy foods in places like schools and other public institutions. In these first three areas, Chile is maybe the most advanced country in the world, while Brazil has one of the best school feeding programs. Finally, all these actions should be part of a big public education campaigns so people can understand and support the changes. To finish, ultra-processed food are not only changing what we eat, they are also changing who we are in our bodies, our culture, and our society. And for those who want to learn more about this topic beyond scientific papers, I strongly recommend the book Ultra-Processed People by Chris Van Tulenken. It shows how these products are affecting our health, our way of life, and even the planet. Oh, thank you.
Well, thank you so much. That was a fantastic presentation and really did a great job setting the stage for what we'll talk about in the rest of the time today. We do have time for some questions. I see a couple have already come up in the Q&A box, and I'll turn this over to Dr. Kearns to walk us through the questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Fernanda. That was a wonderful overview of definitions of ultra-processed foods and the NOVA classification and the stark trends and the changes in our diets, and also some helpful thinking about how to take some action and implement some of your great work. We do have a couple of questions here from the audience. The first one is from Habib Benzian, and he is referring to your slide on the non-communicable disease impacts, and he's asking, why are oral diseases, particularly caries, not listed on your slide for those NCD impacts of ultra-processed foods, especially since you're speaking to many in the audience who are in the oral health field?
Sorry, he asked about my slide. Why? Can you repeat, please?
Oh, so you had a slide that linked ultra-processed food consumption to non-communicable disease.
Yeah.
And you did not have anything on there related to dental caries or oral diseases. And
Yes.
we're wondering why not.
Yes, because I put only those diseases that was studied in that review. It's because of that. Yeah, but you're right. I think nowadays we also have some evidence, but was not in this particular review.
Okay, got it. So you
Yeah,
were just
but thank you for the
Yes.
but thank you for this comment.
Right, because I think that's a missed opportunity to help make the case for the burden of ultra-processed foods when you consider dental caries, oral diseases impact, you know, three plus billion people in the world. So I think Habib's point is to really think about including that in these conversations. Great. Okay. And we have a second question from Steve Silverstein, and he's asking about cooking methods. Can new cooking methods reduce the consumption of processed foods? For instance, an air fryer. Sounds like that's a new a new tool that Steve has been implementing in his life. Can you comment on these new cooking methods and how this might relate?
Yes, I think one thing that we can consider is for sure a method that can help us to cook at home. For example, in Brazil, it's very common eat beans, and of course, takes so long to cook this kind of food. But we can have some tools like a pan, a specific pan that is very common in Brazil that we can cook faster, this kind of beans, and also use other techniques like frozen, cook a big amount of food, for example, and frozen little amounts, so you can have these in your freezer for the whole week, for example. And yeah, maybe if you have like an oven or a specific pan that help you cook faster, could be a good way to help you. I think yes. But when you talk about cooking, just to be sure that is cooking at home and not the process that food industry uses, right?
Great, thank you. Okay, we have another question from Francisco Ramos Gomez, and he's asking about how can we approach families from vulnerable communities that have access to healthy foods. It's much more expensive. So healthy foods are much more expensive and not affordable versus access to processed foods and fast foods. How would you approach that?
Yeah, this is a very good question. Actually, as I say, when we talk about reduce the consumption of ultra-processed foods, it's not just saying that people have to reduce their consumption. We need actions, public actions in different fronts. We have to make fresh and minimally processed foods more accessible. And when I say that, I am talking about financial and physical way. And look at this subgroup of the population, the most vulnerable people. is something that we really have to consider. And of course, when we talk about to reduce the consumption of ultra-processed food in Brazil, it's very different than the US, because in Brazil, we still have 80% of total calories came from non-ultra-processed food. Even the consumption of ultra-processed food is increased here, we still have people eating foods and fresh foods and culinary preparations. But when we talk about US diet, we know that the actions have to be different, because more than half of calories came from ultra-processed foods. So this is very important when we are talking about public actions. We know that this is not easy. And when we talk about taxes, ultra-processed food, and have more financial benefits for healthy foods, we know that this is very important. I think we will have a little about this in the next presentation, but we have the lobby of food industry. That is very difficult, and we really don't understand that, but we have to keep trying.
Thank you. And then we have a follow-up question from Habib asking about the fact that in the nutrition community, there seems to be some controversy around the ultra-processed food concept. Could you speak to that controversy?
Yeah, but why do you mean controversy? Do you mean the definition of ultra-processed foods?
Perhaps that's part of it. Is there some debate? Can you speak to some debate about the ultra-processed food concept and whether it's been fully embraced in the nutrition community, or are there others that are critical of it?
Yeah. I think when we started publish the first paper was very difficult. Even when we started present the first paper about ultra-processed food in big congress. But now we have evidence from different research groups, not only from Brazil, that is the group that developed the classification, and evidence using different data, from different contexts, is not something that we only find negative association of ultra-processed food in Brazil. We found in different countries with different culture, with different socioeconomic context, and also it was beyond our idea, because first of all we thought that it will be only associated with obesity, but now we have evidence the negative impact of ultra-processed food for more than 32 adverse health outcomes. So the evidence are so consistent. And when we talk about this, I think this contradiction, the debates, it's very important in science, and I think this is okay to talk about this, but we just have to be sure that there is no conflict of interest, because we are not, it's not fair to discuss about the definition of ultra-processed food if there is someone that work for the food industry, because their interests are very different than science. Not sure if I answered the question, but...
Right, yeah, and maybe we can come back to that in the discussion just a little bit. And there are some additional questions, but we've come to the end of your Q&A session, and we'll move to our next speaker. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, and thank you for the great questions. Our next presenter is Dr. Laura Schmidt, and she's joining us from right here at UCSF. She's a professor of health policy in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, and a member of the Philip R. Lee Institute for Health Policy Studies. So we're really happy to have her here today, and I won't take any more time, and I'll turn over the floor. Thank you so much.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ben. I'm going to try to share my screen with my slides. You can all tell me if this is working. We good?
Yeah, that looks great.
Great.
And I think this is the wonderful. It's great to be preceded by Fernanda's orientation to ultra-processed foods, because soda and sugar-sweetened beverages are really the penultimate ultra-processed food product. They have a clear track record of health harm. They're really very limited redeeming features other than hydration from a health standpoint. And so they're really, among ultra-processed foods, one of the top ones to consider regulating, particularly when it comes to oral health harms. So I'm going to be talking today a little bit about my own experience and some of the research that we have in California, and updating folks about what's going on with soda taxes in America and specifically California. So let me. This is a shot taken by one of my colleagues, John Ma, who's a surgeon here in the Bay Area. This is a full-page ad in the San Francisco Chronicle, our local newspaper, that was published last Friday on the Santa Cruz soda tax. And I'm going to open with giving you a little introduction to what's going on in the Bay Area and Santa Cruz in particular, and then I'm going to come back to this at the end. The American Heart Association thought it was worth paying for a full-page ad to applaud the city of Santa Cruz, because the city has passed a soda tax in violation of a state law mandating no taxes in our state. A state law, I'll explain later, is a preemption law that was passed in 2018, instigated by the American Beverage Association, the trade organization for the soda industry. And the city of Santa Cruz voters went ahead and passed a tax in violation of this law. And I'll come back to this in a minute, but this encapsulates for people the very contentious situation that we face here in America when it comes to taxes. And our speaker from Brazil comes from a country and a region of the world where taxes are very common on soda and even other ultra-processed foods. So I think an important question for people to ask themselves throughout this talk is, why in America? Why can't we have taxes too? Comes data from the World Bank showing where we have taxes in countries at the country level and territory level around the world. There are different counts. Sometimes you'll hear 117, sometimes you'll hear 130, but it tells you a lot about how popular soda taxes have become. Many of these taxes were passed since 2014, when some of the first health taxes around soda were passed, specifically the very contentious debate that happened in Mexico, leading to one of the first taxes around to promote health. Here in America, we have a very limited number of cities that have passed taxes. 4 of them are in the Bay Area: San Francisco, Albany, Berkeley, and Oakland. And we have a couple in other parts, in Seattle, other cities, Philadelphia, Boulder. In 2014, the Navajo Nation really officially passed the first tax in North America. And I think it's important from the outset to explain that most of these taxes are not taxes on people who buy soda. They are taxes on distributors of soda, the people who often set the wholesale price. And so even though there's a lot of misinformation out there about how these taxes work, there's no requirement that the distributors pass through the tax to the individual consumer. And so it really is a tax on distributors, not people buying soda. Often they do wind up passing through the tax, but they don't have to. Now, here's just a little bit of the massive literature that we have today on the effectiveness of soda taxes. We've got studies showing many studies showing they reduce consumption and sales here at the top. This is just one. It's a meta-analysis of 62 nations and territories that pass taxes. As you can see, there's about a 15% decline in consumption. And you can go down the list. These are all the things that we, back when I got involved in all of this in the late 2000s, we all anticipated that these things would be affected by taxes. And the industry stakeholders said, no, they won't. Now, for this group, I think it's really interesting to look at the oral health outcomes. 30 to 34% decline in dental caries in kids in Philadelphia is a pretty big effect size. And again, this is quite predictable based on our understanding of karyogenicity, how sugars impact bacteria in the mouth and lead to caries. But I just think it's very important to understand that even a small tax, just making it a little more expensive to buy soda can produce such a positive outcome for dental caries. And of course, we have down here some of the cardiometabolic diseases that are impacted by taxation, and that Fernanda very eloquently talked about how ultra-processed foods are driving cardiometabolic disease as well. So the record, based on research so far with taxes, is a pretty good one. I also want to point out that at least in the Bay Area taxes and the way they are playing out in America, the funds that are raised when people pay a little more for soda actually are being redistributed to address health and health equity for the most part. And this is a wonderful study done by Jim Krieger and Chris Madsen and others, showing where the proceeds of taxation have gone in the Bay Area cities, Albany, Berkeley, as well as Boulder. These are all of the cities in America. And as you can see, a lot of the funds, this is being driven by the Philadelphia tax, which goes towards childhood meals. You can see a lot of the benefits of the funds are redistributed back out to address chronic disease prevention and childhood development programs. So you got to ask the question, why do we only have 6 or 7 taxes in America? So many other countries around the world are passing these taxes, and why not here more? And I'm going to give you a little bit of background in why we struggle so much in America to make taxes happen. A lot of this comes down to the power of the beverage industry, and particularly its ability to lobby decision makers in government and to oppose taxation. When you look at the industry perspective on taxation, these are very uniquely threatening in terms of health policy. And I'm going to show you some evidence of that in a minute. There are a lot of policies, whether it's single-use plastic bottle bans and other things that are threatening to the industry, but taxes really hit them the hardest in their profit margins. And so they care a lot about preventing taxes. The industry is very well organized at the global and regional and nation state levels, and they work very carefully and closely together to avoid the diffusion of taxation to the best of their ability. They have been, over the last decade or so, struggling to prevent the diffusion of taxation, especially as evidence of the effectiveness of taxes has become more available. We wouldn't have 130 countries and territories taxing soda if it didn't work for policy goals. But they worked very hard to prevent more. The companies, a lot of the time, people think of the soda industry or food companies as very much in competition. Coca-Cola and Pepsi have been rivals in the soda market for literally over a century. And so we think of them as competitive, but in fact, when it comes to fighting taxes, they work very closely together and very effectively through their trade organizations. And then finally, they really, a lot of the time, their goal is simply to delay or obstruct new taxes. It's not so much even to make existing taxes go away, although they try very hard to do that as well. But a lot of it is just to contain diffusion and keep countries like America from benefiting from this evidence-based policy. So we have here at UCSF an industry documents library where we have quite a bit of materials on the food industry. These are internal documents that come to us through litigation, through investigative journalists and other sources. And they give us a window into how the industry actors think about health and public health policies like taxation. And this is a document that we found in the archive. This is a document that was part of a collection that was obtained. This is a document from Coca-Cola's global division, and particularly the European Union branch of the company. And what this really is it's a radar screen. That's how they describe it in the documents accompanying it. Along this axis, it's how much are these policies here, public health policies, going to impact our business, namely profits. And then along the x-axis here, you've got the likelihood that it would actually happen. And so you can see all the things that they're worried about. These are threats on the radar screen, threats to company profitability. And it's things like using health when governments procure, foods. It's things like an EU ban on chemicals or restrictions on caffeine. But as you can see up here, and you can see these are the company's strategies: prepare, monitor. But over here, these are the things that they want to fight back on. And the number one thing is taxation. This is a major concern for them, and they do aggressively fight back when governments go to think about passing a tax. This is how they do it. Coke and Pepsi don't come out. They're worried about their reputation and PR, so they don't come out and so much and say, hey, city of San Francisco, you can't have it, or Santa Cruz, you can't have a tax. They work through proxies, and particularly the American Beverage Association here in California is the proxy. And so Coke and Pepsi they fund the American Beverage Association. They tell ABA what to do, but they don't actually have to get their hands dirty by being in the middle of aggressive lobbying of our policymakers or threatening scientists or threatening health advocates. They use very, very standard scripts, and you'll hear these in almost every tax debate. It's very predictable, the approach they take. On the one hand, they claim that taxes are going to destroy the economy. And of course, we have 130 tax experiences around the world to demonstrate that economies are not being crippled by taxes, but they say they're discriminatory, they're regressive, they talk about harms to labor. Often they make a big effort to divide the public health and business community and labor by working with local business interests and saying that the taxes are going to be a threat. And then they use a freedom of choice, market-based argument to argue that individuals should take responsibility for their consumption and should be able to decide, and taxes are an impediment to freedom of choice. They also make a lot of claims that are false about health. The one that's always interesting to me when it comes to dental caries, the evidence on dental caries and sugar is so clear, they can't claim that sugar consumption doesn't cause caries. So what they say is, well, yeah, it might cause caries, but you can't make kids consume less sugar. They also argue that they still, despite all of the evidence that we have, continue to argue that soda doesn't cause obesity. They claim that they use these false statistics and sort of how to lie with statistics to argue that, well, if soda consumption is going down and obesity is going up, that must mean that that soda doesn't cause obesity and so forth. And of course, they claim that taxes don't work. I just showed you a page of high-level, high-impact journal articles showing taxes do work. So these are false claims. This is an example of the kind of stuff they do when they come into a local community that is considering passing a tax. They do a lot to divide the community along ethnic, social class grounds, and to divide labor and business and carve them away from health advocates. This is actually a billboard when the city of Richmond was trying to pass a tax years ago. And you can see some of these typical claims. The tax is unfair. They've got a local resident who's saying, hey, this is going to harm people like me. This is a very typical strategy that they use. And the way they do this is through what are called AstroTurf groups. We've all heard of grassroots organizations. An AstroTurf organization is a fake grassroots organization. They're people who are paid minimum wage to pretend like they're activists. And this is an example of in a lot of the California soda tax debates, American Beverage Association organized around grocery affordability. And this is the record of how they paid into these affordable grocery fake grassroots organizations to get their message across. Again, you don't see Coke and Pepsi out there on the ground revealing who they are, but they are the ones who are funding these fake grassroots organizations through their proxy, the American Beverage Association. So what's going on in soda taxes in California? I got involved right in 2009 when we had the first national interest and international interest in taxation as a strategy for dealing with rising obesity and chronic disease rates in America in particular. Kelly Brownell, who's at Duke University, published an article in 2009. This is how I first heard about the idea. I came out of the alcohol field and knew a lot about how alcohol taxes work and thought, oh, okay, we're seeing so much chronic disease, especially in our lower income communities. Taxation would be a great idea. And at the time, his co-author, Thomas Frieden, was the head of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And so we had some very high-profile people saying, hey, we should be looking at taxing soda. In San Francisco, through our Clinical Translational Sciences Institute, we launched an initiative called SF-HIP, which was a collective impact project where the university partnered with the health department, local community-based organizations. And that's how I got involved in the idea of the tax. I met this gentleman, Eric Marr, lovely member of the Board of Supervisors, at this meeting organized by SF-HIP. And Eric asked me, oh, well, if you know about alcohol, how about telling me what we can do about soda and food and childhood obesity? And I came to his office and we talked about it. And I also worked with Jeff Ritterman, a local policymaker in Richmond. And this is me actually the university got an award for working with the board to pass one of the first soda taxes in our country. Back in 2016. And this is really why we have so many soda taxes in the Bay Area, because there were people across cities working collaboratively with community, stakeholders, lawmakers, academics, health departments, American Dental Association, American Medical Association, American Heart Association to make this all happen. I want to point out that in Oakland, the local chapter of the ADA was instrumental And this is a whole publication about how that all went down. So the dental societies, medical societies are absolutely critical in this work. This is a document, again, from our documents library showing the inside scoop. Michael Goldsman is a senior vice president at Coca-Cola, and this is from his documents. These were leaked through the DC Leaks materials on, and this is note 2016. This is right when we were passing the taxes in California. And as you can see, they were very worried because state lawmakers were looking at taxes, and you can see right here, don't worry. This is Coca-Cola saying, we got the American Beverage Association working to stop it in California. And here we are, we're on the ground in Oakland trying to stop the taxes. What happened shortly after we passed this spate of taxes in the Bay Area was that the American Beverage Association went after state policymakers to make the taxes go away. And what they did was they passed a law that preempts local soda taxes. So it's basically a state law that says local governments cannot pass a tax. Preemption happens at all levels of government. It can happen where a nation state tells states that they can't pass laws. And it can also happen, as it did in California, where the state of California told cities, all of our 450 some odd cities and counties around the state, that taxes are not allowed. There are many problems with preemption. They give corporate lobbies a lot of control over different levels of government. They reduce the costs. So the American Beverage Association doesn't have to fight every city in California, 400 cities. They can just have one law at the state level that makes the taxes go away. It stalls innovation because local governments are the incubators of innovation. And it's anti-democratic because people at the local level can't pass a law to do what they want. There are many ways that industry gets preemption, and I'm going to tell you how it worked in soda taxes in California. What happens is the industry lobbies and inserts legislation at the state level. And this happened in 2017. And what the American Beverage Association did was they paid a lot of people to go out and get signatures on a ballot initiative that would have basically made it impossible for a local government to pass a tax without putting it out to a 2/3 ballot initiative. So this would have crippled the ability of cities to fund a library or a fire department. Essentially, they went to lawmakers at the state level and they said, we're going to put this on the ballot in California, this terrible law, unless you ban soda taxes until 2013 at the local level. And literally, there were lawmakers at the state level saying, I feel like I have a gun held to my head. So they were very successful at dividing and conquering. They pitted the business community against the public health community, and they were very successful at slowing the ability of cities around California to pass taxes. And this is an example of how they did it. This is our former governor of California who had the American Beverage Association over to dinner as this extortion was happening. And we wound up with a preemption law. The American Beverage Association's also done this in other states. And as you can see from this list of preemption laws at the state level, basically anywhere where there was a significant movement to pass local soda taxes, the ABA tried to get a preemption law. So back to where we began. At the local level, Santa Cruz, city of Santa Cruz, it's illegal in California to pass a tax at the local level. And the city of Santa Cruz said, the hell with it. We're going to do it anyway. And they passed a tax. We also have at the state level, the governor is calling for ultra-processed food regulations. So this is ground softening for changes in how we tax soda. And at the federal level, Robert F. Kennedy, the new HHS secretary, has called sugar poison and is going after ultra-processed foods, and particularly starting with banning food dyes. So we have a really changing landscape right now. This is a paper that we just published, my colleagues John Ma, Sabrina Adler, and others on the Santa Cruz soda tax. So this is really the opening call in a new battle around taxation in California. So what's going on in Santa Cruz is that, as I mentioned, the preemption law went into effect in 2018. And at that point, Santa Cruz was already just about to put a tax on the ballot. And it didn't, because the state of California made it illegal. But then in 2021, a local lawmaker in Santa Cruz and a bunch of public health advocacy organizations went to court and sued went to court with the American Beverage Association and sued over the Santa Cruz's ability to pass a tax. The American Beverage Association lost that lawsuit, and on a very narrow issue having to do with the fact that Santa Cruz is a charter city under state law. And the ABA tried to appeal it in the state court and lost a second time. So this is starting to make it sound like maybe it's possible for Santa Cruz to go ahead and pass a tax. It's not totally clear. If they pass a tax, they could potentially get sued, and it would turn out that it's okay for them to have a tax. So last November, Santa Cruz voters passed a 2-cent per ounce tax, and it was an outrageous situation where the American Beverage Association spent millions of dollars. There literally is not a household in Santa Cruz, very small city, that didn't have American Beverage Association at their door, filling their mailbox with flyers, saying how horrible it would be for them to pass a tax. The tax passed, and Santa Cruz implemented it on the first day of this month, in the face of threats from the American Beverage Association that they're going to sue them, because technically what Santa Cruz is doing is illegal. What we're doing today is we're waiting. We're waiting for the American Beverage Association to sue the city of Santa Cruz for passing a tax. So far, they haven't filed litigation against the city, and so we wait. I also just want to point out that as all of this is happening in California, there are other states, Maryland, Nebraska, red states, blue states, that are actively looking at state level taxes. And there's a growing discussion about a federal tax. So just to close up, a few take-home points. The first is that, as you can see, the environment for taxation is changing quite a bit at the local, state, and federal level. And we have renewed calls for taxes, and even taxes that are facing down this preemption law in California. The history, which I've lived through a lot of it now, tells us that academics, medical societies, dental societies can be absolutely critical. I mean, we wouldn't have these taxes without the support of the health community. And so I think for people in this call, it's especially important. Right now is a moment of opportunity, and it's a call to action. Taxes have a very good track record of effectiveness in oral health prevention. So this is I encourage everyone to support local, state, and federal lawmakers in making taxes happen more quickly in America and globally. And they're really, at this point, we need to stop the chilling effect. We need state laws that overturn preemption where it's happened, and federal taxes that make it so that we can take advantage in America of this evidence-based policy. With that, I'll close. This is where people can find me, and I wanted, for people who are interested, I'm an academic who got to help with some support evidence-based policymaking. And if you're interested in learning more about how to do that, we run a program here at CTSI called the Impact Program, where we train people in how to do this kind of work. Thanks so much.
That was fantastic. Thank you. And it's really exciting to be right in the middle of this time period when things are shifting and changing so much. I think we have time for one or two questions now. And then I know there's a lot of interest in the Q&A. We can push some of those to the discussion at the end. But I'll turn it over to Kristen.
Yes, thanks so much, Laura. And of course, Laura and I have worked together for many years, and it's wonderful to see all your incredible work summarized there. And that Santa Cruz has gone for it. That's really amazing.
Very
Lovely
courageous.
work. So we have some great questions and comments, but as Ben said, probably just time for one comment and one question. Steve, and then we'll come back in the discussion. I'm so glad you're able to stay for the discussion because there's lots of great questions. I wanted to share Steve Silverstein's comment, and he wanted to recognize Dr. Jared Fine, who's been the past dental director of Alameda County. And he was really instrumental in putting together a group to push for the Oakland soda tax. And he continues to be involved in providing CE courses and on sugar sweetened beverages in the dental community. And he actually had an article that came out in the Journal of the California Dental Association that summarized, excuse me, all the work that went into that tax effort from the dental perspective, because we don't always hear the dental perspective. And then following, and I'll put that article in the chat for folks too. And then following on that, Habib Benzian has a question for you. So even though you did reference some of the dental community's efforts, and the California Dental Association's been really active, and Jared and Berkeley Dental Society, et cetera, we don't see a lot of engagement from the dental community on the larger federal or state scale, or even internationally. And from your perspective, why do you think that most advocacy efforts to introduce sugary beverage taxes don't use the impact of SSBs on oral health in their argumentation? Particularly following on the fact that the WHO sugars guideline is really based on dental caries evidence and the obesity evidence. Why is there a disconnect, and why is it happening from your perspective?
I can't explain. So I haven't done a careful analysis of what's going on in the dental advocacy community. One thing I do know is an impediment for medical societies and possibly dental societies for getting in the mix here. For one thing, they're often very conservative and slow to move. And I think at this point, there's such accumulation of evidence around soda taxes, dental caries, and prevention that it's really important for the dental community advocates to come together around all of this. I do think that we do have a history of professional societies taking donations from food corporations. This is an issue in a variety of medical boards and medical societies. And I think we have to really think carefully about scientific conflicts of interest and corporate donors and influencing the decision making of our professional organizations. And again, it comes back to us. If we're members of these organizations, and we can ask the leadership to not take corporate donations if they are. And so on the question of dental caries, so alongside the tax, you didn't ask me to speak about it, we also passed a warning label policy, and dental caries were straight up on the warning label because there's such good evidence that sugar sweetened beverages are a risk factor. And but I do think that it may be that there's an impression in the public that, oh, well, dental caries, everyone gets them. And there's a sort of normalization of oral health concerns that produces a sort of, it's harder to argue for urgency around that. And it's when you're talking about heart disease, or you're talking about people think, oh, okay, that's the leading cause of death. And so part of this may just be the messaging issue of really doing us doing a better job of explaining the long-term consequences but it's sort of ironic because the best evidence we've got is on the dental caries front. Even the industry doesn't argue with that evidence. They still argue with the obesity and the diabetes evidence. And so, but I think we all need to do a better job of messaging around oral health so that we can encourage not just soda taxes, but prevention in general and getting these products out of kids' diets. They're very harmful.
Great. Thanks so much. Framing seems to be a big theme of both your talk and our previous talk as well. Maybe we can circle back to that in the discussion.
Yeah, and I'm interested in hearing what this group of experts thinks about this issue because I'm not in the oral health field. I work on other chronic diseases. And so I'm interested in maybe we can come together and come up with some new frames.
Yeah, I'll give some credit to the California Department of Public Health that has sponsored some billboards along Highway 80, and I assume other places in the state. I've been driving that way lately and seeing some public messaging about the dangers of sugar-sweetened beverages. And at least one of those billboards, dental caries, is the main focus. That's the message.
Well, and oral health is critical for heart disease.
Of course, yep.
I mean, we
I think
know
if you
this.
drive a little further
And
down, you're
so-
going to see diabetes as you move through the billboards.
Yeah. And so even the population really needs education on that kind of thing as well. I don't think a lot of patients probably really understand the connection between oral health and chronic disease and heart disease in particular, which is the #1 killer.
So this is fantastic. I'm sure there's going to be lots more interest in this. Laura, thank you. Feel free to answer some questions in writing in case we don't have a chance to get to all of them at the end. And we'll move over to our final speaker today. Joreintje Mackenbach is from Amsterdam UMC, where she's an associate professor in the Department of Epidemiology and Data Science. And we're very grateful she's dedicating some of her evening time to be with us today and share some findings from her team's research. So thank you very much. And the floor is yours.
Good evening. And it's a pleasure to join this fantastic session, even though it's the evening in Amsterdam. So today I'll be talking about the opportunities for changing food environments to prevent diseases, oral diseases, chronic diseases, and to promote health. And I think it will be a nice complementary overview to what's already been discussed by the previous two speakers. So, yeah, for this audience, I don't think we have to discuss the massive impact of consuming unhealthy diets. But getting individuals to consume healthier diets can contribute to both oral health and metabolic health. And, the mechanisms are a bit different. For oral health, it's probably more of a focus on sugar and acid and the processing. And for obesity, there's additional pathways through energy intake, salt and fat, etc. But there's really a lot of health to be gained if we were able to promote a healthier dietary pattern. And whereas health promotion professionals have long focused on educating individuals to eat healthier, with limited success, I should say, there has been a shift towards more upstream approaches, which acknowledges the wider context in which individuals make their food choices. And this really makes sense because telling individuals not to consume too much of carbonated sugar drinks or other junk food, while on the other hand, they are bombarded with widespread availability, price promotions, and marketing for those products makes very little sense. And it's probably wiser to spend time and money and energy on creating food environments that make healthy choices easier than to, in fact, focus on weaponizing individuals against an unhealthy food environment with wisdom and skills. And indeed, when thinking about the food environment, we should think of all the influences in our neighborhoods, workplaces, food stores, online, and in our social networks that all affect our food choices. So what can we do when our food environment is promoting unhealthy food choices? And there's different options to steer consumer behaviors, ranging from doing nothing at all to prohibiting the sales of or consumption of products. And in between, there's options such as educating individuals, nudging them towards healthier choices, and using economic incentives such as the taxes that were discussed previously, or subsidies, in fact, to promote, for instance, fruit and vegetable consumption. And politically, there is a lot of enthusiasm for nudging. It's not too invasive and hopefully effective. And in one of our studies, we tested the effectiveness of nudges and price strategies to promote healthier food choices in a virtual supermarket. And I know there's a lot of information on this slide, but the main message is that we saw that only nudging consumers or changing prices, but not informing customers about it, so pricing without price salience, was not enough to promote healthier purchases. And on the other hand, a combination of subsidies, taxes, and nudges would have a significant effect on the overall health score of the diet of, in this case, Dutch adults. In a similar period, we also did an analysis to evaluate the effectiveness of a beverage label implemented by a Dutch supermarket chain, which they had developed themselves in collaboration with the beverage industry. And this label was added to the shelf space for beverages and distinguished between amber beverages, yellow beverages, blue beverages, and green beverages. And you will understand that the color red was purposefully not used here. And we conducted an interrupted time series analysis to see what the effects of implementing this beverage label was. And we showed that after 34 weeks of having this label in place, it essentially had no effect on consumer behaviors and thus not on the profits of the supermarket. Nevertheless, there is quite some evidence from modeling and real-life studies showing that food labeling and taxation, especially when focused on sugar drinks, would be effective and even cost-effective in preventing caries and other dental health outcomes. But with no political will to implement a national sugar tax in the Netherlands, and a large lack of large-scale real-life experiments or natural experiments, we designed the Supreme Nudge supermarket trial. And I'll share a little bit about the process of how this worked. So our aim in this project was to make the healthy choice the easy choice, especially for lower educated customers of a Dutch supermarket chain. And we published our protocol paper and started our project, which was a 6-year project that partly took place during the COVID-19 crisis. And we started bottom up by asking our target group what was important for them in terms of food shopping and healthy food choices. And we also showed them a number of potential nudging strategies that could be implemented in the supermarket. And customers shared that the price of foods, convenience, healthiness, taste, and habitual choices informed their purchases in the supermarket. And they generally liked the idea of nudges, as it would offer them an opportunity to choose healthily without being forced to do so. However, there was also a lot of mistrust against the supermarkets conveying what foods would be healthy and which ones were not, as customers actually recognize that supermarkets, they want to make a profit and may not be completely honest about what really is healthy. We then co-created a real-life intervention together with the supermarket chain. And we did this co-creation process to make sure that the intervention components would fit in the organization's way of working. And the supermarket really needed to feel ownership of these intervention components, as they had to implement the interventions themselves. And this was a decision to make sure that the activities would not just stop after the project would finish, but that the supermarket would be able to continue and would actually want to continue with the intervention. So the co-creation process was a great learning experience and led to some quite exciting decisions, such as that we were allowed to actually increase the price of some products. But it also led to some watering down of intervention components because the supermarkets deemed them infeasible, for instance. During this co-creation process, we had to balance various interests. Of course, as health promotion practitioners, we would have liked to make the supermarket completely healthy. But obviously, this is a commercial environment, so we had to balance commercial and health interests here. And similarly with internal and external interests of the supermarket and the wider chain. But we were able, during this co-creation process, to gain momentum in the discussions by discussing first the more easily accepted interventions. And for instance, lowering the price of fruits and vegetables was something that the supermarket was really excited about because they know that price promotions work. And the same goes for things that they were already doing in their organizations, such as posters and shelf tags and signage, etc. And we used this momentum to drive more of the radical interventions, so to say. And this was, for instance, to implement healthy checkouts and to implement a number of price increases as well. We then selected 12 supermarket locations for our cluster randomized control trial, 6 of which were randomly assigned to be control stores and 6 were intervention stores. And we then recruited customers of the 12 selected supermarkets to participate in the study. And the study lasted 12 months, and we did several measurement rounds in between, which included rather lengthy surveys, but also blood tests. And we retrieved data from customer loyalty cards. And this allowed us to evaluate the effects of the intervention components on the healthiness of the diet, but also on cholesterol levels, HbA1c, blood pressure, etc. We had 4 main intervention components in the end, and these were additional placement of healthy products, enhancing the visibility of healthy products. We used 3 nudging themes throughout the supermarket, and pricing strategies. And we made sure that the nudging themes did not focus on health, given that we had heard from the customers that they would distrust the supermarket in deciding what would be healthy. And even though the Dutch Nutrition Center decided what were healthy products and what were not, we thought the messaging should focus on other characteristics of the foods, such as taste, convenience, and popularity. One important limitation of our intervention components was that we could mostly only promote the healthy products and not discourage the unhealthy products, because it wouldn't be good for businesses of the supermarkets. So in the end, given that in Dutch supermarkets, on average, only 20% of the products are healthy, and obviously we weren't able to promote all 20% of them at the same time, only a limited number of products were targeted by our pricing and nudging strategies. And by the way, we also analyzed the effects of the intervention on the supermarket revenue. And actually, the design for the nudges was made by the design agency of the supermarket chain. And we also made these designs together with the supermarket design agency, taking into account the feedback that we got from our qualitative interviews with our target population at the start of the project. However, after 12 months and a lot of work, we saw no effects on none of our outcome measures. So I'm showing here the outcome of the total percentage of healthy product sales based on loyalty card data, which is 0, but we got the same 0 effect for all of our other outcome measures. And implementation fidelity will have had an effect on the intervention's effectiveness. And this slide shows the results of our continuous monitoring that we did during the trial. And as you can see, none of the 6 intervention supermarkets ever reached full implementation, and some really did notoriously bad. I should note, though, that implementation took place in 2021, so there were many challenges regarding COVID-19 prevention measures, including staff shortages, for instance. But also a quick turnover in staff, low enthusiasm by staff for instance, making healthy checkouts, and many other factors also decreased the implementation fidelity. And we previously did a systematic literature review on barriers for healthy food store interventions, and I've put a link on the slides where we actually saw very similar barriers reported by other studies. So what did we learn from this? Nudging and pricing strategies may be effective, but just nudging people to buy a bit more vegetables does not change their overall dietary pattern. They may compensate. But it is, in fact, feasible to change food environments, especially if you take the time to get to understand the food environment context or the business. And we really thought that co-creation was a great tool to get everyone on board. And without getting everyone on board, as health promotion practitioners, you're just not able to change the food environment because it's outside the public health domain. However, the co-creation process also led to less strong intervention components than we would have liked as researchers. And we know, for instance, that a food tax would ideally be at least 20%, but the supermarket only allowed us to increase the price of unhealthy products by 10%, and only if there was a healthy product, a substitute in the same category available, for which we at the same time would lower the price by 15%. For instance, white bread and whole grain bread or whole wheat bread. And among all of the advertisements, prominent placements and other promotions for things like chocolate bars, sugar drinks, crisps, and these were all product categories that we couldn't touch, our interventions just weren't strong enough. In other words, commercial interests overruled public health interests. And that leads me to the final part of my presentation about the barriers for food environment interventions. And this links very nicely to what has been mentioned by the previous 2 speakers on the commercial determinants of health and how commercial interests often prevent health promotion interventions and policies. And the commercial determinants of health have been recently in a Lancet series defined as the systems, practices, and pathways through which commercial actors drive health and equity. But how does that work, and why is that a problem? So the production and distribution of commercial products, such as cigarettes, foods and beverages, but also pesticides and cars, generates profits for companies. But these companies also harm health and the planet, not only through their products, but also through the way in which these products are made, for instance, by exploiting laborers. And this harm leads to higher costs in healthcare, for the environment, and in the labor market. But the companies do not pay for these harms. The society pays. So not having to pay for those harms means that companies can make more profit, which then allows them to produce and advertise more, and the cycle repeats itself. And that's not to say that all commercial companies are amoral and unethical. In light of our financial system, which requires companies to generate a profit for shareholders, it is logical that companies will do everything they can to preserve their profits. And this will include not implementing healthy checkouts because it threatens their profit, and preventing the implementation of sugar-sweetened beverage taxes because it threatens their profits. And it means, and I'm showing 2 Dutch newspaper articles, but I'll explain what's in them. It means that the producers of fruit drinks will add a little bit of dairy to their orange and apple juices because the beverage tax in the Netherlands exempts dairy. And it means, the article on the right, placing a giant yellow billboard in the middle of a city center, which emits the smell of French fries without showing them or without showing the golden arches, to bring across a message that if advertising for junk foods would be banned in city centers, the company of the golden arches would find a new way to advertise. But let's not end on a note of despair, because I think there are things to be done. It is important to keep in mind that businesses with financial shareholders will do anything to keep their profits stable or actually increase them. And also that protecting or promoting public health is not the main aim of commercial companies, while public health is often influenced in sectors other than the healthcare sector. So we do need to intervene in other sectors in order to promote public health. So when we design our policies, we should expect companies to search for ways around the policies and regulations. And we should make sure that the policies and regulations actually offers then or forces them to develop a business model that is similarly profitable but better for public health. And I'll leave it at this, and I will look forward to any discussions. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. That was really fantastic. Thank you for sharing the results of your studies and I commend you on the creativity of your team to work so hard to put those interventions together. We will turn to some questions, but since we're approaching the end of the hour, there's also a couple of housekeeping items. Roger, if you could, there's 2 things we'll be adding to the chat. One is a survey, just any feedback you feel you'd like to share with us on what went well today, things we can do better for next year, or topics or speakers you'd like to hear from in the future. Please follow that link and give us some information. And then secondly, we'll also be putting in the chat the link to follow for continuing dental education units. So if you are practicing here in California or in the States, you can follow that link and get some units to continue your licensure. And with that, why don't we move to the Q&A?
Great. Joreintje, it's good to see you again. We had the chance to meet in Amsterdam. It's really wonderful to hear about your great work and what an incredible study, and thinking through it's really a community engaged approach to work with consumers in the grocery store and in the grocery stores themselves. So much work. I'm so sorry that you didn't get the effect that you were looking for, but it does reinforce, all these forces that are impacting consumption. But really great work. We do have one question that from Sepida Bonava, who was curious whether you had considered social marketing or social media campaigns to add to those 4 interventions.
Yes, we have considered that, but because it was very important for us to conduct a cluster randomized controlled trial, we didn't want to contaminate the control stores in the study with, social media outings or things that would be available to the general public, because some of the stores of this supermarket chain were functioning as control stores where we didn't change anything and we didn't want to influence the customer behaviors. And we only wanted to have interventions in the intervention stores, which is why we decided to only concentrate the interventions actually in store, and not anywhere else.
Do you think the addition of those kinds of campaigns might have had an effect?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think online influences have a massive impact on consumer behaviors, and the amount of advertising for unhealthy food products is massive. At the same time, I think even if you would be able to have some online interventions as well, I don't think we would be able to compete with all the unhealthy influences there. I mean, I think the balance would be even more off than in the real life supermarket. Yeah. So I think it's a great idea. I just think the marketing budget of food producers is so much bigger than our budget.
Right. And then you mentioned in your qualitative interviews that respondents said that health claims, that they were actually turned off by health claims. Were you surprised by that result or?
Well, we were surprised that the customers, or actually our target group, I mean, almost everyone in the Netherlands is a customer of a supermarket because, that's where we do our shopping. But our target group, that they were so aware of this potential conflict of interest here. So we were a little surprised. Nevertheless, we often talk about this consumer citizen paradox if you think about food choices, where citizens will say that the health impact of foods is very important to them when they do their shopping. I mean, the first thing they mention, if you ask them about reasons for choosing certain products in a supermarket, is health. But as a consumer, we do completely different things. We certainly do not choose our products for health. We choose because we see a promotion or because it's a product that's familiar to us. So citizens and consumers, they act very differently in response to the food environment.
That's a really good way of making that distinction. I think we see that in many places, including coming into the dentist office and what they tell us they're doing at home versus what they're actually doing. And then what are your plans for a next study to follow up on this big, body of work that you've
So actually, I mean, obviously we were a little bit discouraged by the null results of this Supreme Nudge project. At the same time, it was a very clear message. We spent a lot of money and a lot of resources and 6 years of a very large research team's time on designing. I think it was a really good intervention. And it just wasn't enough. So we used this messaging to drive political discussions around taxation, nationwide taxation, and regulation of advertisement for supermarkets, etc. It didn't lead to anything so far. So we're really focused on a new body of research trying to understand why policy measures get implemented in some contexts and why not in others, and also why at a certain point in time and not earlier or later. So really trying to understand this policy process, acknowledging that commercial food companies probably have a very large role in this policy process.
Yet another common theme amongst our three speakers today, the power of the industry. Okay, well, thanks so much. I think maybe Ben, time to move into more general discussion.
Yeah, I think so. I see there's some activity happening in the Q&A. Thank you, Laura, providing some really good insights there in response to questions. So I know you're there. So if there's any other questions we want to talk about in this conversation. Um,
Yeah, actually, I want to start off with one, ask my own question. And so much of what we've talked about today has to do with framing and definitions and how to make good arguments. And the ultra processed food concept is relatively new. And we've used different definitions before, junk food, artificial foods, all kinds of different things. So, what is it about this new framing of ultra processed foods and even the NOVA classification that's going to do something different this time around? Why is this better than other attempts at framing that have happened, really over the last 50 years or so? And I'd love to hear all three of your opinions on that if you have one.
I can get us started. I think ultra processed foods as a concept is just intuitively makes sense for people. It's pretty easy to explain it. And we all just sort of have a gut level reaction to turning the package around and seeing a list of chemicals. We know, I mean, it's just very intuitive. And even though, and I think it is driving a very important conversation right now in America about the cosmetic additives in these foods. And I think they have been, uh, the are, I'm stunned. The more that I do research on these on what's going on with ultra processed foods, the more shocking it is to me how poorly regulated the cosmetic additives are in America. I mean, we've focused up until the NOVA classification really started to gain a lot more attention. We were very preoccupied with the sugar, fat, and salt, but I think it has really drawn attention to the cosmetic additives. And because of the Graz loophole, we literally have hundreds of, tens of thousands of chemicals in our food supply that have never really undergone any public scrutiny for whether they're safe. It's a little ironic that they're focused so much on the food dyes, which are the only thing in our food supply that have really had any scrutiny by the FDA. The colors and flavors are basically unregulated. There's an organization, it's a trade association for the food industry called FEMA, not to be confused with disaster relief. But FEMA is a trade association where if I have a new chemical I want to throw in food, all I have to do is call up FEMA and tell them here's my private evidence that this new chemical is safe. It could be an artificial sweetener, it could be a flavor, it could be an emulsifier, it could be, and we have very limited evidence. We don't know very little about how these chemicals affect teeth. We know they can be harmful to the gut. But we are way behind we're way behind in terms of monitoring and understanding the chemical additives. And so I think it's it's something that is very intuitive for people. People get it. And it is different from junk food. It's not about fast food. It's really about industrially produced foods with a lot of chemicals in them, sugar, fat, and salt.
Thank you. Fernanda, did you want to comment?
Yeah, sure. I think Laura brings something that it's perfect. I agree totally that ultra-processed food definition needs something that is intuitive and simple. And of course, fast food is, most of them, I think, are ultra-processed foods, but we also have other foods like breakfast cereals, flavored yogurts, packaged bread that are part of the diet and contribute a lot with calories, and they are ultra processed foods. So it's not just about saying that fast food make you sick, but we have much more foods that contribute a lot with our diet that are making us sick. And I think a very good example of this simple message that ultra processed food can be, it's in Brazilian dietary guidelines. That is just simple to say that people should eat fresh and minimally processed food, and even culinary ingredients, culinary preparation, that of course we need culinary ingredients to make them. When we talk about culinary preparation, we need oil, sugar, salt to make this food more palatable. And when we talk that we can't eat any salt and fat, it's complicated because, okay, so people, it's afraid to eat, to use oil and salt and even sugar, but they can eat ultra processed products just because there is a claim saying that it's rich in fiber or it's made with whole grains. So, but there is a lot of additives that nowadays we have amount of evidence saying that make us sick. So I think it's very, very different when we talk about ultra processed food than just talking about fast food.
Thank you. Joreintje, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, maybe one last thing to complement the previous speakers. I think it's very helpful that consumers increasingly understand that ultra-processed foods are not foods that you could make yourself in the kitchen. And that makes people realize that they're not really foods, right? They're so far away from real food. I think that is helpful in the debate and the framing, although I'm a bit skeptical about whether ultra-processed foods is going to really save us in the war against the commercial companies. But yeah, I think it's definitely helpful.
Thank you. And we're close to time here, but another common theme in the questions has been what are some of the most effective policy actions or lessons learned from policy failures? And maybe each one of you could comment about that as a last contribution here.
Your 10-second pitch.
I can go first. And I think what's really important, what we've also seen across the globe in terms of sugar taxes, is that sugars are, in response to a sugar tax, often replaced by artificial sweeteners. And I think that's problematic for all kinds of reasons, also public health reasons and dental health reasons. And we should think more in terms of true pricing in that sense, not to be too narrow in our taxing policies. And I think that's an important lesson to be taken to the future.
To this point, a few years ago, the Rockefeller Foundation came out with a report on the true cost of food. And the food on your plate costs about 2 or 3 times more because of all the negative externalities for health and the environment. And so I think it's very important for us to be, currently taxpayers are sort of are subsidizing these industries that are causing harm. And we're living with the consequences. And because nothing that we're doing, as we go along and subsidize these industries, it never sanctions them to stop harming health. And I think, as JD pointed out, there are ways to make profits without doing population damage, damage to whole populations of people and especially children. And so I think that's what we're having a conversation finally about that. And whether it's pricing front of package warning labels, letting consumer, it'll probably take all of these things to really add up to real change. And most importantly, educating and empowering individuals. But I think we have sort of, at least in America, reached a tipping point where people on both sides of the aisle are looking at the situation and just seeing it's completely unsustainable. We just can't keep going on like this. The health harms are just too significant, and it's too costly to allow these companies to just continue on in their current vein.
Yeah, I agree with them, and I just would like to add that although we don't have a lot of evidence about the impact of ultra-processed food and oral health, is a topic that we still need to study. We already have so much evidence about the impact of ultra-processed foods in different chronic diseases, and although we also don't fully understand all the mechanisms that link the ultra-processed food consumption to all this type of diseases, we still need sorry, let me rephrase. Although we don't know about all the mechanisms that link ultra-processed food to chronic diseases, this is not a justification to not act. I mean, we already have enough evidence to have public policies to curb the consumption of ultra-processed foods. And this is something that we have to discuss, and we have to make advocacy to have this in different contexts. I know that each country will need different actions, but share our actions and try to discuss how is the best way to deal in each context. It's a good way to start.
Well, with that call to action, let's conclude for the day. Lots of thanks to go around, especially to our speakers for sharing their time and expertise with us today. That was fantastic and really appreciate that. I'm going to continue thinking about these presentations for quite some time. Thank you, Kristen, for expertly leading our discussions, and huge thanks to Roger and to Dorothy for getting everything running smoothly today. Huge thanks to everyone who attended. Your comments and questions made this so much richer. Be sure to fill out our survey, collect your CE credit, and for everyone who registered, we will send a recording of today's session where you can watch that at your own time and share with your colleagues. Thank you so much, everybody. Be healthy and take care.